Hey, what's up guys? So today we're looking at MSI's RTX 2080 Gaming X Trio, which is their flagship cooling design for the RTX series. Now, in my last video, we looked at how the RTX 2080 itself performs in games against current offerings like the GTX 1080 Ti and the 1080, and the basic conclusion there was basically to save yourself the $100 or $150 and go with the 1080 Ti. The reason for this is that they perform basically the same in non-RTX games, and since there's no RTX titles actually published for playing at the moment, it makes it very difficult to guess what the performance will be like there. So yes, this card will have the potential to do real-time ray tracing and perform deep learning operations like DLSS, but only for a handful of games that support those effects. We will be testing this when they're finally implemented. So in this video, we will be looking at the Gaming X Trio exclusively, and this card seems to be one of the more popular options during this RTX launch among some of the other options. And we're going to be looking at cooling design, thermals, and of course overclocking as well. But first, let's talk about a few details that you should probably know before buying this card. Now, one of the most important details here is the size, as this directly affects compatibility in your current case. And like the majority of RTX cards, the Gaming X Trio is not small. It's 2.5 slots, 345mm long, including the I/O bracket, and 140mm tall. As the name suggests, there are 3 fans on the Trio, one 85mm fan on the left and 2 95mm fans on the right. All 3 fans remain idle until the GPU temp reaches 58 degrees C, at which point 2 fans on the right will kick in, and the 85mm fan will kick in about a minute or two after, I'm guessing when the memory temp reaches a certain threshold. I mentioned this in my teardown video of the card, but the fan on the left is smaller and is offset downwards to make the NVLink connection compatible with other cards. Now, there are a few benefits to the fans being inactive under a certain temperature threshold. First, of course, is noise, and if you're not gaming, you won't hear anything coming from your graphics card at all. And the second is improved lifespan of those fans, if you plan on keeping the card for more than a couple of years. Personally, I think a threshold of 58 degrees C is a bit too high, as it means potentially that your GPU could be idling at 57 degrees C when it's not in use, and although there's nothing really wrong with that, I'd personally just rather have the fan spin at around 500 RPM just to bring that idle temp down a little bit. Luckily though, idle temps for this model are in check at 36 degrees C at an ambient of 20, but just keep that temperature threshold in mind. I've seen other manufacturers start to do this as well, and the threshold just seems to be getting higher and higher. On a visual note, I think the Gaming X Trio looks pretty good, and it's definitely a breath of fresh air from MSI, as it looks like they're catching on to the mixed feedback of their previous red and black color scheme. The Trio is entirely neutral except for a couple red highlights here and there, and powering up the card shows a ton of RGB. You've got 3 RGB elements at the top of the card and another 2 at the bottom, and it does come configured as a rainbow out of the box. I tried playing around with the lighting, but the current version of MSI's Mystic Light software doesn't seem to work with the RTX series just yet, so hopefully we can get an update for that quite soon. Same situation with MSI Afterburner as well. I couldn't see any fan RPM values, and the voltage slider was completely grayed out. EVGA's Precision XOC at least had the V-Core offset slider enabled, but it didn't seem to do anything as the V-Core constantly remained at 1.05 volts. The card is powered by 2 8-pin connectors, which is a step up over the 8 plus 6-pin connectors on the Founders Edition RTX 2080, not that it makes a real difference to Nvidia's restriction to overclocking. The backplate is a brushed aluminium that looks quite nice. Again, I can definitely appreciate the direction that MSI are taking here by making their design a lot more neutral and build friendly. The backplate does soak up quite a bit of heat as well, since there are thermal pads between it and the PCB, and I measured just over 49 degrees C on top of the backplate over the GPU. I was surprised to see no thermal pads on the underside of the VRM though, but luckily that's not needed, as we'll see in just a minute. Disassembling the card is pretty straightforward, with all screws accessible via the backplate. The small backplate screws are what you want to remove first, and the backplate should come straight off, then only the heatsink screws are left. There's 4 4-pin connectors that you'll need to unplug, and now we can just take a look at that massive heatsink. So the cold plate for the GPU die is attached to 6 nickel-plated copper heat pipes that feed directly into that dense fin stack, and all the components of the VRM are in direct contact to a cold plate underneath the heatsink. The memory gets its own base plate here, which is secured by 2 screws besides the display outputs, but there's no contact between this plate and the heatsink. The V-Core VRM seems to be a true 12-phase layout, although I can't confirm that 100%. The PWM controller is the MP2888, but I can't find any data sheets online on this one, but there doesn't seem to be any doublers on the PCB, so it looks like a true 12 phase. If anyone has more info here, feel free to drop that down below. If it is a true 12 phase though, we're looking at an extra 2 phases over Nvidia's Founders Edition RTX 2080. Okay, now let's talk about thermals, as you'd expect these to be pretty decent with a cooler that big. Out of the box, the Gaming X Trio will sit happily at 65 degrees C during full load at a fan speed of just 1000 RPM. And the VRM and memory temps were in check as well. These were measured with a K-type thermocouple since there were no sensors on the board. Noise levels were pretty outstanding as well. I attempted to measure these with the current test bench setup, but most of the noise was coming from my AIO. You'll have to take my word here that it was whisper quiet, but seeing it was at 1000 RPM at full load, that's probably not hard to believe. Now, overclocking was a bit of a mixed bag. As I said, I couldn't seem to raise the V-core at all, and whether or not I had the V-core offset slider maxed out or not in Precision XOC, the V-core just sat constantly at around 1.05 volts. The power limit was also quite low at 109%, although power levels sat pretty comfortably under 100%, and in the end I was able to add 150 MHz to the GPU and a massive 950 MHz to the memory. Now, these offsets gave us an effective GPU clock of 2100 MHz and a memory clock of 7950, and this yielded a pretty significant boost in gaming of just over 10% here on average in Warhammer Vermintide 2. Again, although the superior VRM does help here, it mostly comes down to the quality of that GPU. Thermals were pretty decent too, even with the overclock in place, but you'd expect that since there was no difference in the GPU voltage. Overclocking is definitely recommended in this instance since there's a ton of cooling headroom available for the GPU, memory, and MOSFETs, but keep in mind that you may not be able to achieve such a significant offset as I did here, as that will come down to the GPU and memory modules that happen to be paired with this board. So overall, this is a really solid board if you're considering the RTX 2080. Now, we all know pricing is very inflated compared to the reference pricing of $699 that Nvidia announced during the RTX launch. The majority of RTX 2080s can be found sitting around $800 to $850, with the Gaming X Trio towards the upper end of that price bracket. But rightfully so, because you are absolutely getting your money's worth here in terms of additional cooling and reduced noise levels. The 1080 Ti remains the much better option in my opinion, as it performs identically to the RTX 2080 but for $100 to $150 less, at least in the titles that we have available to test today. I do understand though that some of you will insist on buying the RTX 2080, and however you rationalize that is completely up to you. Maybe you want to tinker around with RTX when it's finally implemented in games, or maybe the price difference between the RTX 2080 and the 1080 Ti isn't a significant difference in your region. Either way, the Gaming X Trio is a very solid option, especially in terms of thermals and noise. It's hard to see how anyone could be disappointed with this card. So guys, let me know your thoughts down below, subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, I'll see you all in the next one.